May 23, 1969. A double album arrives in record stores across Britain with cover art unlike anything rock fans have ever seen. Swirling psychedelic imagery, abstract spiritual symbols, and a title that sounds more like a confession than a concept. Tommy. Inside are 2 vinyl discs containing 24 tracks that tell a single, unbroken story. Not a collection of songs. Not radio-friendly singles with filler. A story. An opera. In rock and roll. The music press doesn't know what to call it. The band doesn't entirely know how to explain it. But within weeks, Tommy becomes something unprecedented. A rock album that demands to be experienced from beginning to end. That treats popular music as art. That suggests maybe, just maybe, 3-minute singles aren't the only thing rock can do. Pete Townshend, the 24-year-old guitarist and songwriter behind it all, has gambled everything on this moment. His bandmates thought he was losing his mind. The record label wanted them to stick to what worked. Critics wondered if rock musicians were getting too pretentious for their own good. But on August 17, 1969, as the sun rises over 500,000 mud-covered festival-goers at Woodstock, The Who performs Tommy in its entirety. Roger Daltrey, draped in white fringe, hits the climactic notes of "See Me, Feel Me" just as dawn breaks. The timing is so perfect it seems divinely orchestrated. In that moment, rock opera stops being an experiment and becomes legend. This is the story of how a deaf, dumb, and blind boy became a pinball wizard, a messiah, and the vehicle for rock music's most ambitious artistic statement. This is the story of how The Who nearly destroyed themselves creating it, how a last-minute song saved the entire project, and how Tommy changed music forever. Welcome to the Sound Vault. Every album has a story, and some stories, like Tommy, rewrite the rules entirely. By 1968, The Who were trapped in a paradox of their own making. They'd built their reputation as the most explosive live act in rock. Pete Townshend smashing guitars, Keith Moon annihilating drum kits, Roger Daltrey swinging his microphone like a weapon, John Entwistle standing stoically as the chaos erupted around him. They were violent, visceral, maximum rhythm and blues. They were the sound of youth rage given form. But they were also drowning in debt. Their stage destruction cost thousands of pounds per show. Their singles, My Generation, I Can See for Miles, I Can't Explain, were brilliant. But in 1968, the music world was changing. The Beatles had released Sgt. Pepper's. The Beach Boys had created Pet Sounds. Albums were becoming art statements. Singles were starting to feel disposable. Townshend felt it acutely. He was an art school student at heart, a reader of philosophy and mythology, a thinker who happened to play guitar like he was trying to murder it. He'd already experimented with mini-operas. A quick one while he's away on their 1966 album was a 9-minute story told through connected musical segments. On The Who Sell Out in 1967, he'd included Rail, another narrative piece. But these were sketches. Hints. What Townshend wanted was something bigger. A full album that functioned as a single piece, where every song connected to tell one complete story. The problem was, he didn't know what that story should be. He'd tried before with an abandoned concept called Quads, about a future where parents could choose their children's genders. It never worked. The idea yielded one great single, I'm a Boy, but nothing more. Then, in late 1967, something shifted. Townshend's friend, artist Mike McInerney, introduced him to the teachings of an Indian spiritual master named Meher Baba. Baba had lived in silence for the final 44 years of his life, communicating through an alphabet board and hand gestures. His message was about awakening to a higher spiritual reality, about breaking free from the illusions of the material world. Townshend became obsessed. Here was a philosophy that spoke to something he'd been feeling, that people were trapped by their senses, by surface-level reality, by the noise of the world. What if someone could experience life without those distractions? What if being cut off from the world wasn't a disability but a path to enlightenment? The seed of Tommy was planted, but it would take a hotel room in Illinois to make it bloom. The epiphany came in the most unlikely place imaginable. Townshend would later describe it vividly. A Holiday Inn in Rolling Meadows, Illinois. A vibrating bed that was too big. A television with a fuzzy screen. Sheets that smelled like something warm but not quite alive. The Who were on tour in America, and Pete was exhausted, frustrated, creatively blocked. And then, as he later recalled, he heard what he could only describe as the voice of God. He never elaborated on what that voice said. But whatever happened in that anonymous hotel room in 1968, it gave him the answer he'd been searching for. The story crystallized in his mind. A boy who witnesses trauma so profound, he becomes psychosomatically deaf, dumb, and blind. Cut off from the world, he experiences reality purely through vibration, through feeling, through an unfiltered spiritual connection to existence itself. Everyone around him tries to fix him, to cure him, to bring him back to normal reality. But Tommy doesn't need fixing. In his isolation, he finds a kind of purity, a connection to something deeper than sight or sound. He becomes extraordinary not despite his condition but because of it. And then, here was the brilliant twist. The world discovers his gift. They don't understand it. They can't comprehend that his power comes from his separation from worldly distractions. So they turn him into something he's not. A messiah, a guru, a rock star. They build a cult around him. They demand he lead them. And when he can't give them what they want, they destroy him. It was Townshend's most personal, most ambitious, most dangerous idea. It touched on his own struggles with fame, with spirituality, with the way audiences consumed and discarded artists. It dealt with childhood trauma, with exploitation, with the price of being different. He called it the brain opera. Then Amazing Journey. Then Journey into Space. The title kept changing as the concept evolved, but the core remained: a deaf, dumb, and blind boy's journey from victim to mystic to martyr. When he brought the idea to his bandmates, their reactions were mixed. Roger Daltrey, the band's powerful vocalist, was skeptical but willing. John Entwistle, the bassist, was quietly supportive. Keith Moon, the drummer, thought it sounded mad, which, coming from Moon, was almost a compliment. But their manager, Kit Lambert, was electrified. Lambert was an Oxford-educated producer with opera in his blood. His father had conducted for the Sadler's Wells Opera. He understood what Townshend was attempting. This wasn't just a long album. This was rock attempting to do what opera had done for centuries. Tell a complete dramatic story through music alone. Lambert became Townshend's ally, his advocate, the person who would help shape this mad vision into something recordable. Together they began mapping out the structure. Townshend started writing, and in September 1968, The Who entered IBC Studios in London to attempt the impossible. They were going to make the first true rock opera. They just had no idea if it would work. IBC Studios at 35 Portland Place in London became The Who's second home for 6 months, and for much of that time, it felt more like a prison. Recording began on September 19, 1968. Producer Kit Lambert blocked off sessions from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., but recording regularly spilled into the early morning hours. Engineer Damon Lyon Shaw manned the 8-track recording setup, state-of-the-art for 1968, but still limiting for the ambitions Townshend had. The album still didn't have a name. In the studio they called it Deaf, Dumb, and Blind Boy, or The Brain Opera, or Omnibus. Townshend eventually settled on Tommy. It was a common British name, a nickname for soldiers in World War I. Simple, universal, perfect. But nothing about the recording process was simple. Townshend arrived with demos he'd recorded at home. But translating those intimate sketches into full band arrangements proved brutal. The Who were used to bashing out singles in a few takes. Tommy required precision, overdubs, careful construction. It went against every instinct the band had developed as a live act. IBC Studios didn't have an isolation booth, which made recording Townshend's acoustic guitar alongside the full band nearly impossible. Some tracks ended up with thin electric guitar sounds instead because they couldn't capture the acoustic properly without bleed from the other instruments. John Entwistle, the bassist, grew increasingly frustrated. Songs were recorded multiple times, arrangements changed, sections rewritten. Entwistle later said, "We had to keep going back and rejuvenating the numbers. It just started to drive us mad." Townshend had written most of the material himself, but he knew there were 2 songs he couldn't write. The story required Tommy to be abused by his uncle Ernie and tortured by his cousin Kevin. Dark, cruel moments that Townshend felt too uncomfortable putting in his own words. He turned to his bandmates. Keith Moon wrote Tommy's Holiday Camp. John Entwistle wrote Cousin Kevin and Fiddle About, songs so ruthlessly dark that Townshend later said, "They're ruthlessly brilliant because they are just as cruel as people can be." Kit Lambert pushed the band constantly. He had eccentric ideas. Getting the band to march around the studio playing trombones, having engineer Bob Pridden dance with a microphone to capture a particular sound effect. He double-tracked all of Roger Daltrey's vocals, giving them a haunting quality that became signature to the album. Lambert also kept pushing for an orchestra. Townshend refused. He insisted Tommy had to be something they could reproduce live. No studio tricks they couldn't recreate on stage. The rock opera had to rock. But by November, when melody makers Chris Welch visited the studio, the project still didn't have a coherent plotline. The Who took a break to tour. They desperately needed money to fund the recording, including an appearance at the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus on December 10th. They returned in January 1969, booking Monday through Thursday, but having to play weekend gigs to avoid going deeper into debt. The financial pressure was crushing. Their American label, Decca, got so impatient they released a compilation album, Magic Bus: The Who on Tour, which got savaged by critics for being misleading and poorly assembled. By March, Townshend realized something was wrong. The album was good, but it wasn't great. It felt too serious, too humorless, too heavy. And more importantly, it didn't have a hit single. In 1969, even a rock opera needed a commercial hook. That's when everything changed. The pressure was suffocating by early 1969. The Who were hemorrhaging money. 6 months in the studio had yielded a double album that might be brilliant or might be career suicide. Nobody knew which. And then Kit Lambert invited a music critic to IBC Studios to hear the rough assembly. His name was Nick Cohn, and he wrote for The Guardian. He was also one of the most influential rock critics in Britain. If Cohn loved it, Tommy had a chance. If he didn't, they were finished. Cohn listened. The band waited. When it was over, Cohn's response was diplomatic but devastating. It was pretty good, but it felt too po-faced, too religious, too serious. It lacked excitement. Townshend was crushed, but he also knew something about Nick Cohn. The man was obsessed with pinball. They'd played together in Soho arcades alongside a teenage girl named Arthur, who beat them both every time. Cohn was even writing a novel about her. Arthur, teenage pinball queen. In a last-ditch attempt to win Cohn over, Townshend suggested, "What if Tommy was a pinball champion?" Cohn's eyes lit up. Anything with pinball was fantastic, he said. Townshend went home that night and wrote Pinball Wizard in a few hours. The chord progression was inspired by Henry Purcell's Symphony Upon One Note, a Baroque piece from the 1600s. The lyrics told the story from the perspective of a reigning champion being defeated by Tommy, a deaf, dumb, and blind kid who played by sense of smell and intuition. Townshend thought it was clumsy, almost music hall-like, but when he brought the demo to the studio, everyone loved it. They recorded it quickly. On February 7, 1969, Pinball Wizard was cut. It was released as a single on March 7th, the same day the final recording session for Tommy took place. The addition of Pinball Wizard transformed everything. It gave Tommy the commercial hook it needed. It injected color, absurdity, and fun into a story that had been drowning in spiritual seriousness. Suddenly, Tommy wasn't just about trauma and enlightenment. It was also about a pinball wizard who maxed out machines using vibrations. It was ridiculous. And it was perfect. But there were other struggles behind the music. Lambert went on holiday in Cairo before mixing was finished, leaving engineer Damon Lyonshaw and assistant Ted Sharp to mix the album. They didn't think IBC was well suited for the task, but they did their best. When Lambert returned and heard the mixes, he made a controversial decision. He remixed the entire album so the vocals sat way out front, with the band lower in the mix. Some tracks lost their punch. Townshend was initially unhappy, but Lambert argued that the story had to be clear, the lyrics had to be heard. This was opera, after all. The mixing took until late April. Then there were delays with the cover artwork. Mike McInerney's elaborate psychedelic illustrations needed time to print properly. But finally, in May 1969, Tommy was ready. They'd spent 6 months creating it. They'd nearly bankrupted themselves making it. They'd fought, struggled, doubted, and almost given up a dozen times. Now they just had to hope anyone would care. Tommy was released in the United States on May 17, 1969, and in the United Kingdom on May 23. It arrived as a double album in a striking gatefold sleeve designed by Mike McInerney, featuring abstract spiritual imagery that hinted at the journey within. BBC Radio 1 received an advance copy in early May and gave it its first airplay on Pete Drummond's show on May 3rd. Townshend did a series of interviews attempting to explain the plotline, but because Tommy dealt with abstract spiritual concepts from Meher Baba's teachings, his explanations often came out confusing and contradictory. Then the reviews started rolling in. Melody makers Chris Welch attended the press launch show at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club on May 1st. The Who played Tommy at full stage volume in the small venue. Despite the volume leaving his ears ringing for 20 hours, Welch's verdict was unequivocal. "We wanted more." Disc and Music Echo ran a front-page headline. "Who's Tommy? A masterpiece." Critics and fans alike were confused by the storyline. Kit Lambert pointed out this made Tommy no less confusing than operas by Wagner or Puccini. But the music was undeniable. Robert Christgau, writing in The Village Voice, called it the first successful extended work in rock music besides the Mothers of Invention's We're Only in It for the Money. Albert Goldman in Life magazine wrote that The Who played through all the kinky complications of the narrative in a hard rock style that was the antithesis of contemporary serious rock. He declared that based on innovation, performance, and sheer power, Tommy surpassed anything else in studio-recorded rock. But the commercial performance was initially slow. Tommy entered the UK charts at a modest position. In the US, it peaked at number 4, but then something unusual happened. It kept re-entering the charts over and over for a total of 126 weeks, far longer than any other Who album. Pinball Wizard, as a single, did exactly what it was designed to do. It hit number 4 in the UK and number 19 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Radio stations played it constantly. It became the gateway drug that led people to explore the full album. But Tommy's true power wouldn't be revealed until The Who took it on the road. Because reading about rock opera was one thing. Experiencing it live was something else entirely. The Who had planned to perform Tommy live since its conception. In April 1969, they spent weeks rehearsing at the Hanwell Community Center in Ealing, including a final run-through on April 23rd. They changed the running order and dropped 4 songs. Cousin Kevin, Underture, Sensation, and Welcome didn't make the cut. Townshend later said that first complete run-through was when they realized they had something truly cohesive and playable. Roger Daltrey's singing had improved dramatically since the band's early tours. They realized this new live act could completely change their career. And it did. After a few warm-up gigs in late April, The Who began incorporating Tommy into their live shows. Public reaction was overwhelming. This wasn't just a rock concert. It was theater, spectacle, a complete journey from darkness to light. Then came Woodstock. The Who were scheduled to go on Saturday, August 16th around 7 p.m. They waited and waited. The festival was running catastrophically behind schedule. They finally took the stage at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning, August 17th. They were exhausted. The stage had subpar sound equipment. The crowd was a mud-covered mass of 500,000 people. Both Townshend and Daltrey would later describe the experience as miserable. But something magical happened during See Me, Feel Me, the climactic moment of Tommy. As Daltrey sang, "Listening to You, I Get the Music," the sun began to rise over the crowd. The timing was so perfect it seemed impossible, almost divinely orchestrated. Blue spotlight on Daltrey in his white-fringed outfit. The dawn breaking behind him, 500,000 voices joining in. That moment, captured on film in the Woodstock documentary, became iconic. It wasn't The Who's best performance. They'd played Tommy better dozens of times. But it didn't matter. The visual of that sunrise, the scale of the moment, the sense of collective experience. It was rock opera achieving exactly what Townshend had envisioned. Tommy made The Who stadium ready. It proved rock could tell complex stories. It opened the door for concept albums across every genre, from Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon, to Genesis's The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, to Rush's 2112. 2 weeks after Woodstock, The Who played the Isle of Wight Festival, stealing the show from Bob Dylan with their Tommy performance. In October 1969, they played 6 shows at New York's Fillmore East, where Leonard Bernstein praised them for their musical ambition. The album's success cleared The Who's debts and transformed them from a great singles band into album rock pioneers. Tommy remained in their live set throughout 1969 and 1970, including legendary performances at Leeds University in February 1970 and the 1970 Isle of Wight Festival. And the impact rippled outward. Suddenly, rock musicians felt permission to be ambitious, to treat albums as complete artistic statements, to combine music with narrative and visual spectacle. Tommy didn't just change The Who. It changed what rock music could be. For all its triumph, Tommy carried shadows that stretched for years. The first controversy was almost immediate. Was Tommy's story too dark? The album deals with childhood trauma, murder witnessed by a child, sexual abuse by Uncle Ernie, torture by Cousin Kevin. Some critics in 1969 called it sick and distasteful. BBC Radio 1 DJ Tony Blackburn called Pinball Wizard distasteful on air. Townshend defended the album's darkness. Tommy's story required those moments to make his journey meaningful. The abuse, the exploitation, the way people used Tommy for their own purposes, that was the point. The album was about how society treats people who are different, how we create messiahs to worship and then destroy them when they don't deliver what we want. But the bigger controversy came later, in the way Tommy was adapted and reinterpreted. In 1972, the London Symphony Orchestra recorded their version with an all-star cast. Rod Stewart sang Pinball Wizard. The orchestral arrangements were beautiful but smoothed away much of Tommy's rock edge. Then came the 1975 Ken Russell film. Russell was a controversial director known for operatic excess, and his adaptation of Tommy was spectacularly over the top. Anne-Margaret writhing in baked beans, Tina Turner as a chainmail-clad acid queen, Elton John as the pinball wizard in platform boots, Jack Nicholson singing as the specialist. Russell didn't like rock music. He loved the theme but not the sound. He changed parts of the story, added new songs, re-recorded everything with actors singing. The film grossed $27 million in the US alone and earned Anne-Margaret an Oscar nomination. But many Who fans hated it. The story was changed. In the film, Tommy's father is killed rather than being the killer. New songs like Champagne and Bernie's Holiday Camp replaced moments from the original. The excess of Russell's vision buried the spiritual core under camp and spectacle. Townshend had mixed feelings. He appreciated Russell's boldness but felt something was lost in translation. The 1993 Broadway musical, directed by Des McAnuff, tried to restore some of Townshend's original vision while making the story more coherent. It ran for 900 performances and won 5 Tony Awards. But again, the adaptations raised questions. Whose Tommy was this? The original album left much to interpretation. Each adaptation imposed a specific reading, and there was a personal cost. Tommy became an albatross around the Who's neck. Audiences demanded it. Critics measured every subsequent album against it. Townshend would later say they felt trapped by their own creation, unable to move forward because people only wanted to hear them perform Tommy. Keith Moon, the drummer, died in 1978 from an overdose of medication meant to help with alcohol withdrawal. He was 32. While Tommy's success didn't kill him, the years of relentless touring that followed it, the pressure to keep performing, to keep being the Who, certainly took their toll. Success always has a price. For the Who, Tommy was both their greatest triumph and the thing they could never escape. Tommy reached number 2 in the UK charts and number 4 in the US, but those numbers don't capture its real impact. The album legitimized rock as high art. Before Tommy, critics treated rock as disposable youth music, fun but frivolous. After Tommy, rock musicians were artists, capable of creating works that demanded serious critical attention. It paved the way for progressive rock's golden age in the early 1970s. When Yes, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and others created 20-minute suites and concept albums, they were walking through doors Tommy had opened. It proved that album-length narratives could work commercially. The Who made money with Tommy, both from record sales and from touring. That gave record labels confidence to back other ambitious projects, and it created a template for rock spectacle. Tommy showed that rock concerts could be theatrical events, complete with narrative arcs, visual design, and emotional journeys. Every arena rock show that treats a concert as theater owes something to Tommy. The album has been inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. It's on every greatest albums of all time list. In 2003 and 2004, deluxe editions were released with demos, alternate takes, and live performances. In 2013, a super deluxe box set included 3 CDs and a Blu-ray. But perhaps the most telling legacy is this. More than 50 years later, people still discover Tommy and feel the same shock that 1969 audiences felt. The idea that rock music can tell a complete story, that albums can be experienced as single works of art. These seem obvious now. But someone had to be first. Pete Townshend was first, and the deaf, dumb, and blind kid he created became immortal. Roger Daltrey still performs Tommy in its entirety occasionally. When he does, audiences spanning 3 generations sing along. The story of trauma, enlightenment, exploitation, and redemption still resonates. The music still sounds like nothing else. In 2017, a new touring production by New Wolsey Theatre cast disabled performers in key roles, finally addressing one of Tommy's most complicated aspects, a story about disability created without input from disabled people. The production was celebrated for bringing new perspectives to the tale. Tommy influenced everyone from David Bowie to Green Day to My Chemical Romance. Anytime an album tells a story from beginning to end, Tommy's shadow is there. Anytime a band performs an album in its entirety, they're following a path The Who blazed. And the questions Tommy raises about how we create messiahs, how we consume artists, how we treat people who are different, remain painfully relevant. Tommy's cult following that turns on him when he won't give them easy answers. Look at social media. Look at cancel culture. Look at how quickly we build people up just to tear them down. Tommy was about 1969, but it's also about now. The story of Tommy is the story of impossible ambition made real. Pete Townshend heard something in a Holiday Inn in Illinois and turned it into rock's first true opera. The Who spent 6 months in the studio creating something nobody was sure would work. Nick Cohn's love of pinball accidentally gave the project the commercial hook it desperately needed. And on a muddy farm in upstate New York, as the sun rose over Woodstock, Tommy became legend. But Tommy is also a cautionary tale. It's about the price of creating something perfect, the financial pressure that nearly destroyed The Who, the way success trapped them in a role they couldn't escape, the death of Keith Moon, the decades of expectations they could never quite meet again. And it's about interpretation. Every adaptation of Tommy, the orchestral version, the film, the Broadway show, reveals how different people read the same story. Is Tommy about spirituality or exploitation? Is it about awakening or about how society destroys anyone who's truly different? The answer is yes. All of it. The ambiguity is the point. 55 years later, Tommy endures because it touched something fundamental. The deaf, dumb, and blind kid who becomes a pinball wizard isn't just a character. He's a metaphor for anyone who experiences the world differently. He's a mirror reflecting how we treat genius, disability, and difference. We still don't know what the voice of God told Pete Townshend in that hotel room, but we know what he created afterward changed music forever. Tommy won critical acclaim, commercial success, and cultural immortality. It also ended in exhaustion, death, and decades of complicated legacy. Both things are true. Both things matter. And that double album that arrived in May 1969, with its confusing storyline and revolutionary ambition, still sounds like the future 55 years later. This has been the Sound Vault. Every album has a story, and some stories, like Tommy, echo forever.